I'm Tom Schumacher, and I've been on the Envision board for 15 years and was past president and current treasurer of the organization. And we were talking during the break here about what happens if we eliminate all of the cows in the area. And one of the answers was, well, they'll turn into pets. And I'm just thinking, can you imagine seeing these cows being walked along the road? And then the pooper scooper issue is just too much. Welcome, and I am not a professional speaker, but I'll do what I can today. In 45 minutes or less, what we're going to do is we're going to have Paul Linzmeyer up here in a little bit to talk about how climate migration might impact our area. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what strategic foresight is, because strategic foresight is really at the center of what we're doing at Envision Greater Green Bay. And then a little bit more specifics about exactly what we're doing. Paul Linzmeyer. I met Paul over 25 years ago when we were both founding members of the Employers Workforce Development Network, and we were trying to figure out how to deal with an influx of employees that were working at our companies who didn't speak English and were culturally new to this area. Paul has always brought creativity and passion to everything he's done. And he's worked in business, government, nonprofit, at the local, regional, national, and even international level. So we're lucky to have him here. Now, Paul has collaborated with Oliver Buxey. Is Oliver here today or not? Oliver, you want to say hi? There we go. All right. So Paul and Oliver have collaborated, and what they've come up with is to look at the climate change and what the possibilities are for macro impacts to our area. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Linzmeyer. So.
You know, my wife says that I'm an eternal optimist. She said something like, you should take the rose-colored glasses off periodically. But I'm really optimistic today. And the reason I'm optimistic today is because of you. It was 29 years ago I moved back here from the mountains of Colorado, which people thought it was crazy to leave, to the Great Lakes of northeast Wisconsin. I'm originally from here. I can't say enough about how glad I'm here. 20 years ago, the Employers Workforce Development Network and a number of partners put together the first major event at Lambeau Field Atrium after the renovation. And we brought in a guy by the name of Richard Florida. And what we were trying to do then was we were trying to address the issue of why are our young people leaving? Why are we having such a hard time getting a workforce that meets our needs? And the thing about the Employers Workforce Development Network is we were trying to commit to communities of choice and companies of choice. And that's important in what we're talking about today, because that future that we planned back in September 18th of 2003 has come to fruition in spades. And I can't tell you how proud I am about that. Now I'm working on Great Lakes initiatives, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. So there's an indigenous expression that we do not inherit the land from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And instead of saying our, maybe we should say we borrow it from all children, because that's what really the future is about. And I think what we need to think about today is that future, that preferred future that we're going to create and design. Is that going to meet the needs of our children? Is it going to make them think well of us? So we're creating a legacy of sorts. I'm in my 70s. You notice some of the speakers are a little bit older. My dream would be for young people to come up here and be part of the design process. And that's why as I look around, I see so many different types of people here, different companies and organizations. That's very exciting. So I want to show you something here just to kind of get your head around the concept of future. So 80 years ago, swimming at Bay Beach was banned. 60 years ago, a woman author by the name of Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring. Is anybody familiar with Silent Spring? I read it back 60 years ago, and I reread it recently, and it was really a humbly and beautifully written book that talked not about the negative part of human development, but more about the possibilities of change. That book started an ecological revolution, which created between 1963 and 1972 the Clean Air Acts, the Clean Water Acts, the Endangered Species List, the Wilderness Acts. And then our own Gaylord Nelson started Earth Day in 1970, which I happened to participate at Marquette University when I was a freshman. So you start thinking about that one book made a lot of change happen. But it was 20 years ago that we started getting rid of the PCBs in there. It was 15 years ago that an organization that I helped found called the New Wilderness Alliance, the only thing that we can say we really did was we created we got a grant to create a feasibility study to make Bay Beach a swimming beach. And if you look at the right, this is a rendering from the city of Green Bay about how that swimming beach is going to look. It's supposed to get started this year. Whether it gets started this year or in 2 years or 5 years, just think about the importance of that to our community. And for me, the reason it's so important is because most people in Green Bay don't live on the river. Many people don't have boats. So they don't realize that we are part of one of the greatest freshwater regions in the world, that we are on the coast of the Great Lakes. People don't know that in northeast Wisconsin or in Green Bay, and I think that's really important. So that helps frame where we're going. So if you look at this slide, the data on the California slide is from a 6-week period in 2023, January and early February. And if you look, there's 3 record-setting rainfalls in that area. I mean, this is real stuff. Look at the snow in California they're getting, not only in the mountains, but they're getting in Los Angeles. I mean, this is real stuff happening today. Miami is flooding all the time now. And if you look all around the country, floods are an issue. We know about, when I was in Colorado, we had forest fires, which was really interesting because it's a very arid climate in Colorado, especially up in the mountain, a lot of the mountain areas. And one of the reasons we moved back is Californians start moving in and putting in these expensive sprinkler systems in an arid climate when you don't have water. It's craziness. But if you look at the UP, northeast Minnesota, and the northern part of Michigan, those are going to have issues with wildfires, and so is northern Door County, by the way, because what's going to happen is if the temperature warms, the trees that are successfully growing there will not live; they'll die. And if we don't have a management plan in place, that's the potential for wildfires is great. But if you look at where we live right now, it's not significant. So this shows billion-dollar disasters. And if you look across the top, you got droughts and heat waves, you got flooding, I think it says hail, hurricanes, whatever. And in the last 3 years, we've had $20 billion disasters in these areas. In 2011, we only had 4, and I went all the way back to 1990, where we would sporadically have 1, and that's all adjusted. So the significance of of what's going to be happening in other parts of the country is going to lead to potential migration here. I put that Lake Mead has dropped 158 feet. Well, it's actually, that's old data, it's 170 feet. What if Lake Mead gets too low? If Lake Mead gets too low, the hydroelectric turbines aren't going to be able to run anymore. So the problem is going to be exacerbated for those people. Not only are they not going to have enough water, they're not going to have power. So what is that, what kind of effect is that going to have on us? Water usage, you can see in the south, in the west and the southwest, it's significant. I think the second bullet point is really significant. You got 99% increase in population with 127% increase in water use. I mean, that's totally unsustainable, and it's also totally irresponsible from my perspective. What do we want, Oliver and I? We want this to become an issue that in which we can address as a community, and I think that's really important. We have a lot of experts that are tied into our program. Oliver attended an event in New York where this is starting to become on the radar for Great Lakes states, and I think a lot of people are just starting the conversation. I think we're much further along than many people. And here's just kind of a summary, and I think this is really important. Migration is different than moving. I mean, if you think about the Great Migration from 1910 to 1970, that's when African Americans moved from the oppression of the Deep South to the Rust Belt, to the industrial states of the North. You had the Dust Bowl migration, but you also had small migrations. When I quit college after 3 years for all sorts of reasons, and mostly because I hadn't declared a major or minor, which is, I had more credits than I needed to graduate, so I said, hell with it, and I moved to San Francisco. That was a mini migration. There were young kids my age were moving to California in droves. So migration is different than moving, and I think somebody said earlier that rural communities and small towns, can really take advantage of the potential migration initiatives, but we have to do it in a responsible manner. We have to do it in a way that that takes into account the social, economic, and environmental impacts on our region. We can't just look at the economic impacts. It has to be a balanced approach. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to talk to you, and I'm very excited after all these years of working on these initiatives to see you all here. I think it's just a fantastic testament to who we are as a community.
Now it's time for everybody in the room to put on their futurist thinking hats. We're going to have some table discussions. We're going to take 7 minutes for you to talk with the people at your table. Take in what Paul said, and the one kernel I'd like you to take away from that is, as climate change affects different areas of the country, as things evolve, the Great Lakes are going to be a more and more valuable asset, and it's going to be a magnet for people to move into that Great Lakes area, including Green Bay. So that's a positive that's out there. If we look back at trends, though, it would say that people aren't moving to Green Bay. If we look at the census, the most recent census from 2010 to 2020, where's the migration going? It's basically going south. So Paul has presented some indications that maybe there'll be some things that draw people back north. Here's some other possibilities that you might consider in your table discussions. And inside your program today, you've got a little half sheet of paper. At the conclusion of our table discussions, I'd like each person to fill this out to your best of your abilities. on what are the 3 most impactful things that will shape the future of Greater Green Bay in the next 10 years, and then draft a headline. We heard some headlines earlier. Draft a headline of your own, and then we'll collect these at the end of the event, and we'll tabulate them and get some feedback on that. But if you look at some of these other factors that are up here, urban flight, we talked about that a little bit. Family friendliness. Green Bay is, and this area is known to have people born here, educated either here or somewhere else, go somewhere else for a career first stage, and then when they start building a family, where do they end up? Back here. Why? Because it's a nice, safe community, good education, and all of that. The rise of remote. If you look at the COVID era, the last couple of years, remote working all of a sudden became pretty normal. There were a lot of us that were working from our homes, from places that were not our workplaces. And then for sure the cost of living. I can give a personal testimonial on this because I moved out to New England for 10 years. I was in the shadow of Boston, and believe me, it was sticker shock when I got out there, and it was a blessing when I got back here and needed to get into a home. So we're going to break into the table discussions. You've got 7 minutes. We'll give you a 2-minute warning when it's time to collect it. But what we want to know is what's going to either attract, repel, or change this area in terms of all these factors. So here are some headlines that I had already prepared. I didn't realize Phil was going to steal a couple of them. That happens. And I'm finding overlap between what Thomas is saying and what I was going to say. So this is a good thing. It's unplanned, but it all kind of weaves together. The one that I threw in here that I thought was interesting was fewer cows meaning more vegetable farming. If you think about the acreage that it takes to support a farming operation with cattle, what's going to happen to all that acreage if you don't have as many cows? So what is strategic foresight? I'm going to take a little moment about just to go into a little bit of what strategic foresight is, because it is central to what we're doing at Envision. And then a little bit about what we're doing specifically. As Thomas said earlier, foresight is not a crystal ball operation, and that's an interesting story with lighting your car on fire. But we're not about predicting the future, and that's not what's important. What is important is that we're paying attention to the future. All of us in our daily lives tend to deal with today. Today is really important. Today is constantly calling you and talking to you either on the phone or on your emails or whatever, and it's demanding reactions. And by the time you get done with the day, you're tired and you haven't looked anywhere beyond just dealing with today. So what strategic foresight is about is looking at tomorrow through the eyes of what's happening today and looking for those drivers, looking for those factors that are going to make a difference out in the future, and then looking at the futures that go with that. Change, Benjamin Franklin said, change is the only constant in life. One's ability to adapt to those changes will determine your success in life. I think Ben's statement was totally wise then, it's totally wise now. The only difference between the two points in time are that change is happening a lot faster today than it was in Mr. Franklin's time. So we're all dealing with change at a quick pace, and it's probably only going to go faster. One of the tools that we use in strategic foresight is called the cone of plausibility, and you notice there's actually 2 cones on this. The lower cone is the past, and if we think of our past, we're all here today. That's that point where we all converge at this moment in this place. And if you think back in your life, what were the events that got you here? And what are the events that if they hadn't happened, or if they had happened differently, or if you had made a different decision, you would have ended up somewhere else? And that could be a decision you made, it could be some education, it could be a relationship, it could be almost anything. One of the most important things is where we were born. Warren Buffett said that being born in America is winning the birth lottery. And if you think about it, being born as one of whatever it is, 8 billion people in the world, there's only 300 million of us in the United States. That was our starting point, so that helped us get to this point. As we look out into the future, we ask three questions. What is going to happen? And as we heard earlier, most of what's going to happen, especially in the near term, is pretty predictable. As we get further and further out, it gets a little more vague and a little more questionable. The bigger question that's important for us today and going forward is what else could happen? And if we think about what else could happen, those are the things that are not on our radar. When I exited college, I had a very clear career path until I got fired from my first job. That was a change in plans. So I had to regroup at that point, and had I known that, I probably would have behaved differently in the job. I probably also would have had the Rolodex for the recruiter closer at hand so I could get that next job. But then the last question is the most important, and that what is our preferred future? What do we want to happen given what we know to the best of our ability? We found this genius out here that has a wonderful quote. You probably recognize him. And what he said was, if we can provide an ideal view of the future, it will improve the decisions we make today. And I think that's what the core of this is all about. Is the other quote that I remember that relates to this is, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. So by knowing where we're going, or at least having an intention of where we're going, we can make decisions today that will influence us in that direction. So the first place we look for signals of change is history. Because as Newton said, an object in motion tends to remain in motion along a straight line unless acted upon by outside forces. We just experienced a huge outside force in the form of the COVID pandemic, and all of our lives were changed significantly by that. Steve, in his earlier remarks, used GPT chatbot, right? Okay, he used that to form his introductory remarks. He didn't even write his own introductory remarks. How disruptive is that? So these discontinuities are the things that say that the past will not necessarily indicate the future. And then the question is, what do we do in order to influence the future? So with strategic foresight, we look at three horizons. The first horizon is now. So the first horizon is within the next year, what's going to happen. Again, that's fairly predictable. That tends to be where we tend to spend most of our time. The next place we go is Horizon 3. And when I first heard this sequence, I'm financial and accounting and math by background, and I know that 3 does not follow 2. Follow 1. There's a 2 in between. But what we do with foresight is we look at Horizon 1, where are we? Horizon 3, where do we want to be 10 plus years out? And that gives rise to Horizon 2, which is the space that we have to influence what's happening out there in Horizon 3. So the key is to go to that Horizon 3 and think about that destination before we start making decisions on how to get there. So with Envision Greater Green Bay, we are asking the question, and we asked ourselves the question, why are some communities so successful and vibrant and other communities stagnate and fail? And if you think about, as I was saying that, you were probably thinking of cities that fall into each of those categories. On the successful side, how many were thinking Silicon Valley or something technological? A few? How many were thinking? All right, I know you haven't had a lot of coffee yet. Stagnate and fail. Cleveland, Detroit, right? Maybe Rochester, New York. That was the home of Kodak. Think how that town has changed as film and the dominance of Kodak changed into not only digital cameras, but no cameras at all, because we all have phones that are better cameras than what we had with the old 35 millimeter age. This is a quote that is a tongue twister. If the other guy's getting better, then you'd better be getting better faster than the other guy's getting better, or you're getting worse. He had to stay up a long time to dream up that one. I think Satchel Paige probably said it better, and he said, "Don't look back, somebody might be gaining on you." If you look at the currents of change, there is no treading water. You're either going to be floating with the change and you're going to have whatever the outcome is that comes from that, or you're going to be either falling behind or moving one way or the other. But it's important to realize that things are on the move and you can't just tread water. That doesn't work. So what we're doing at Envision turns out to be something unique. We're asking the question, how can we make Greater Green Bay a community of choice? That means attracting and retaining the things that are good, whether it's people or business or industry or culture or any of that. The cool thing is, we're pretty unique. We've talked with people at the University of Houston and they have a degree program in foresight. We've talked to the World Future Association, and they don't know of anybody else that's doing this. So we're really cool. The uncool part, we don't have anybody to steal from. So the uncool part is we can't borrow from anybody. We got to come up with this stuff on our own. So that's created some interesting challenges. So we've had to decide, well, how are we going to go about doing this? And what we've come up with is an approach. It's a combination. We realize we can't do this by ourselves. We have to do it by connecting with 300 people at an event like this. We have to do it through workshops and getting people to buy into the strategic foresight approach and getting the mindset of looking into the future. We've also done some consulting jobs or consulting engagements. And we've got 4 people who have graduated from the University of Houston Foresight Certificate Program. And they've gone out and helped organizations like Casa Alba when they were going through their leadership changes there. They're also working with the Green Bay Botanical Garden to say, what is the future of that organization as we go forward? We've got our event today and signals teams I'll talk about in a little bit. Our workshops, we conduct workshops. We've been conducting 2 a year. We just concluded one. We've got another one coming up in September. If you're interested, if this intrigues you, please sign up for a workshop. The workshop is 8 weeks long. It's facilitated by Gary Golden. He's a Wisconsin-rooted, New York-based futurist who speaks all around the world, does consulting all around the world on futurist topics. And Gary is our facilitator, and it's 8 weekly sessions. The cool part is every participant is working on a project that is germane to their organization or them personally. So we've had representatives from all these different organizations go through our foresight workshops over the last 5 years. And we've got over 120 graduates, and we're working on forming a network of those 120 so that they can share experiences, what worked, what didn't work, what's on their radar, so that they can keep this conversation going. So we're really excited about that. It's a really good program, and the cool part is when you're done with the program, you come out with something that is a working, living document that you can take back to your organization and share with others. Looking at the community of choice, that's what we're doing as Envision. We think we're uniquely placed to do that. What we've done is we've identified 5 signals team areas, and we've formed signals teams around each one of those. Now, this is not everything that affects a community of choice, but it's some 5 pretty important things. If we look into the housing and safety element, for instance, we've identified 6 pieces from safety, neighborhoods, homelessness, transitional housing, which is both transitional housing on the back end, so for old people like me, I guess Paul has already labeled me, as we go out of living in our own homes into maybe some group settings of assisted living or beyond, that would be one form of transitional. Other forms of transitional are out of homelessness. People who are moving from being a student and moving out of mom and dad's home. That's a transitional. There's other transitional situational where somebody has a health problem or something like that. Availability, affordability, and transportation are two other ones. And then STEEP at the top there, that's actually an acronym that we use in Strategic Foresight. And it's looking at factors that affect multiple areas. So these areas are fairly narrow, but there's some factors that affect multiple areas. And what STEEP stands for is social, and that includes demographics and cultural changes, technological, and that's all around us. Economic, a couple of the big economic factors that have come to light lately are supply chain and remote working. Those are two things that 5 years ago you weren't talking about, but those are in the middle of what everybody's talking about now. Environmental, Paul talked about some of the things that are happening on that front. And then finally political, and I'm not even going to talk about that. So looking at signals in transportation, just to give you a little sampling, there's been some talk recently again about getting rail service in this area to point south. And there would be some advantages to that in terms of access to the amenities and museums and whatever of Milwaukee and Chicago. It also allows people to come from Chicago and Milwaukee north to this area. And as we have more and more things that would attract people into this direction, be it Titletown development over near Lambeau, or maybe the Mulva Cultural Center in De Pere, we may see that is something that is just as valuable as bringing people into this area. Now, one of the drivers in terms of this type of element is population. Certainly, if our population doubles, this becomes a lot more viable because we have a lot more people to utilize it. Another one, and some of this thunder has been stolen already, which I really appreciate. Right now, we can order basically anything to be delivered to our homes in a matter of hours to a matter of a day. And I can have it on my doorstep. If we reverse that, why can't we be delivered to something that we want to go to? And what I was looking at here, and Thomas covered a lot of it, if we end up, let's just say we end up in an environment with electric-powered, autonomous vehicles that can be on call because I've got them tied into the calendar on my phone. So I've got my calendar, whoa, back up, here we go. There we go. Okay, got excited there. But I've got a calendar on my phone that says grocery shopping or medical appointment or a school event of some sort. And my transportation app on my phone recognizes that I've got to get to the doctor by a certain point in time, and all of a sudden that vehicle appears at my doorstep and takes me there. And then make sure I get back home or gets to my next appointment. Think of what that does to downtown parking structures. That was mentioned earlier by one of the people. Think of what that does with home construction. Do we need the garages on homes? All of a sudden we can convert that to different space or maybe not even need a garage. Parking, I've mentioned that already, but just a lot of different things that could happen with that. Where to look for signals. If you're interested in looking for signals, they're all around us. The first place to start is where you already are looking. You're already reading and paying attention to different sources, and those are the places you start. A good place to augment that is to go to Google Alerts. If you haven't done it, you can Google how to do it. Isn't that amazing? Google's one of those parts of speech that has gotten to be a noun, a verb, and all those different things. But Google Alerts, what you can do there is put in some keywords of things you're interested in. I've got keywords of affordable housing, housing first, and then nuclear fusion, because I think that's cool. And I get alerts of articles that I might be interested in from a whole array of different publications that I don't have to be subscribing to necessarily. It just brings them to me, and I can look at them whenever I'd like. Social media is another place where there's a lot of information that's exchanging hands. You can follow people, podcasts and those kinds of things. Find people who are saying things that you're interested in that are future looking, and then listen or look at who they are following and follow them. Another place are the organizations that are admittedly future-looking. The Da Vinci Institute, where Thomas Fry is the founder. Trend Watching is a group that our last year's speaker came from, and Institute for the Future is another good one out there. These are two of my favorites. The Progress Network. A lot of what we hear in the news and media in general tends to be negative. And the Progress Network is committed to communicating things that are going right around the world. And not everything they consider going right is what I consider going right, but it's indicators of progress, and it's just a good place to go to understand what's happening in a positive way around the world. And write this one down, USA Facts. This is a place where every one of you should check it out at least. It's a website, USA Facts, and it was put together by Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer you recognize as being the CEO of Microsoft after Bill Gates passed the baton. And what Steve Ballmer has done is, after discovering it was difficult to find data from the government, he formed this USA Facts. It takes information from 40 different government agencies, brings it all together, puts it into a database that is accessible by subject. So you can look in an area, and whatever you're interested in, you can find a whole bunch of statistics related to that. Two cool things. It's totally funded by a billionaire, so there's nobody else buying influence on this thing. And number two, he expresses absolutely no opinion on any data. You can look at the data, it's presented, you make your own conclusions and take it where you will. But it's just a really rich source of opinion-free data, and I love it. Now, as you gather signals, you're going to end up with too many of them, and you won't be able to access them when you want to. So that's where an app that we use at Envision comes into play called DIIGO. It's D-I-I-G-O. And it's an app you can download, and you can connect it with your browser on your phone or on your PC or whatever you use, your laptop. And what it does is it allows you to tag an article and put a keyword with it. And a lot of, when I talk to people who, when Thomas Fry talks about following how many thousands of, 1,000 headlines a day, he's not reading 1,000 total articles, I'm guessing, unless he's really, really fast. But what you can do is if you see that headline and you just read a little bit, that's an interesting one, tag it, give it a keyword. And then later on, you can access DIIGO and say, okay, show me everything that I tagged with this particular tag. And it's very nice for organizing things. So what are we doing with the Envision Signals teams? First of all, we're traveling on 5 parallel paths. They're not identical. We're still figuring our way through this. We're doing our current assessments and scanning for signals. We're identifying the key drivers and creating scenarios for the 4 futures. That's another concept that we have in Strategic Foresight is the 4 futures. And one of them is the status quo. Things are just going to continue as they are. Another one is opportunistic. And that is, we're going to go as we are today, but we're going to look for things that are opportunistic where we can change our direction just a little bit to be in tune with what is happening as it changes. The third one is the radical one. That's transformation. That's where we transform ourselves into something totally different in anticipation of something 10 plus years from now. And the last one, which nobody wants to consider, but needs to be considered as decline and collapse. And what happens if everything just doesn't go right? And how are we prepared for that? And how can we avoid that? With our signals teams right now, they're all manned by board members of Envision. What we're planning is within the year, we want to selectively invite people to come in because we realize we do not have all of the knowledge, experience, expertise in all of these areas we're looking into. So we're going to be looking to some of you and people in the community to join us and be part of these signals teams so that we can make those the best they can be. So what's next? What can you do? Participate in a Strategic Foresight workshop. I already pitched it once. I'll pitch it again. September. You can sign up. Go to our website, stop at the registration desk, ask any of the board members of Envision. We can help you with that. Develop a scanning habit. 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day. Just jot down, use Digo to tag things, and start scanning and thinking about the future. When we talk to our graduates of the workshops, 100% of the time they say it's changed the way they think about the future. And I hope that this session today has also helped you change the way you think about the future. And if it has, we've got a success here. Support Envision Greater Green Bay. Check out our website. Subscribe to our newsletter. It's a bi-monthly, so it's not going to inundate your email inbox. Financially support us. We are a volunteer organization. Everybody on the board of directors is a financial contributor to our organization. Look at the table sponsors that we've got out there and thank them, because they have all contributed to making our organization go. And then all of the sponsors that we have for this event, we appreciate them too. And the other is spread the word. If you like what you're hearing today, spread the word. Let other people know what we're up to. And I've talked to a number of people today that said, I didn't even know about Envision before. We want that to be something that isn't heard anymore. And then make strategic foresight a part of your DNA. So thank you very much. I hope we've given you something to think about. And thank you. I'm looking forward to your headlines.